various decision points. I don't know what to make of any of it. Frankly speaking, I'm very skeptical. I think there are larger issues at stake here, and I'm not sure he's taking, advice or requests from anybody in the Arabian Peninsula. I just don't know. My own gut feeling is that he will strike, simply because I don't think he knows any other way to go. He's trapped himself, frankly, in a very difficult position that he can attribute to his own big mouth. He's the one that said they've got to give up their enriched uranium, can't have that. They've got to open the Strait of Hormuz. Well, the Iranians have been pretty clear on that point, that they're not going to open the strait because he wants them to, and they're not going to give up their sovereignty and independence by turning over enriched uranium to the United States or anybody else. So I have great difficulty taking the whole idea seriously that we're talking to them at all. I just don't buy it. We have an 8-letter word for it in Philadelphia, but I don't want to repeat it on the air.
No, FUBAR?
That's not 8 letters. Now, come on, Gary.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. You're right. I just immediately went to that. The FUBAR was would be another perfect substitute for that. Doug, back let me pull this up here. On May 4th, so the IRGC releases this map of what they call the area of control that they believe, they're right. Mm-hmm. And there it is laid out for them. So they specifically put this out just a week or two ago. Can you imagine them backing down on any inch of this, of what they're putting forth here?
Not really. And of course, keep in mind, if you're sitting in Tehran and you look at where we are at the moment, they really have the strategic high ground. Nothing can move in or out of there without it being liable to be struck by some weapon system. Cruise missile, tactical ballistic missile, unmanned system, small boats, large boats, whatever. So I don't see any evidence that they're about to give this up. The other thing, Gary, that we don't know, and this is very depressing because we don't know it, is exactly what President Putin and ultimately President Xi said to President Trump in private. I think whatever they had to say, Putin obviously on the phone and then subsequently in face-to-face meetings with President Xi, they told him there would be, quote unquote, unspecified consequences if he took the decision to go ahead and restart the war with Iran. Now, I don't know what that means. I don't know what Donald Trump's interpretation of that is. Trump is the sort of person that doesn't like to be told anything, least of all being told that he can't do something. That's sort of like waving a red flag in front of the bull called Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is preeminently emotional. He emotes much more than he thinks. He doesn't take the time to study anything, to understand what he's dealing with, which is one of the reasons we got into this conflict to begin with. He never really understood Iran. If he had even bothered to spend some time reviewing what the war between Iran and Iraq produced, and the fact that the Iranians sustained somewhere between 500,000 and 800,000 casualties, and roughly 50% of that dead, then he might have had an appreciation for the willingness and readiness of the Iranians to resist. But he didn't do that. So there are a lot of unknowns here, but my bottom line message is, if you don't know what else to do in a fight, eventually you decide to punch somebody in the face and hope for the best. And I still think that's what we're going to see Donald Trump do.
Doug, you talk about his emotional approach that overtakes him basically. It's so disturbing. And here's just one example, just from that same Q&A that he had today in front of his ballroom that he's building.
I'm not doing this politically. Look, everyone tells me it's unpopular, but I think it's very popular. When they hear that it's having to do with nuclear weapons that could take out Los Angeles, could take out major cities very quick. When they hear that, when they're explaining, I'll tell you what, when we explain it to people, I don't really have enough time to explain it to people. I'm too busy getting it done. When they understand, I think it's frankly very popular.
So he knows it's unpopular, but he thinks it's popular in his own mind. That's how he translates that. That's what he arrives at.
Well, he's believing in a lie. He knows what he's saying is a lie. There are no intercontinental ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads on them aimed at the United States inside Iran. And the Iranians have never demonstrated any interest in that capability. Now, I don't know what will happen in the future. I mean, I think the principal lesson everyone takes from this war all over the world is if you don't want to be disrupted or invaded or regime changed by the United States and Israel, you better have a nuclear weapon. So I think the ultimate outcome of this whole thing is the opposite of what we said we wanted to do. But, at this stage of the game, there are other things to be considered. First of all, the Iranians have done a very good job of watching and observing us. They've adjusted their tactics. They've deployed their weapons in such a way that are designed to not just best protect them, but also to defeat us. They know from where we are likely to attack, what avenues of approach we will use. These are in the air. They know where the missile flight paths are likely to be. And the bottom line is, they're preparing for all of that. And I think, frankly, from what I am gleaning from open source material coming from overseas largely, but not exclusively, I think the Iranians are now better positioned to take us on than they were at the beginning of this war.
That's so disturbing to think about, and I understand why you arrive at that. Here is, you've probably heard him before, Azadi, who's a professor at the University of Tehran. Here's his take on what the dynamic is at this point in time.
This is the fifth time that Trump is doing this. Last time he did this was on May 5th. A day earlier, he had announced that he would do Operation Project Freedom, escorting ships. And then he canceled that idea of it in 24 hours. And I think the main reason, last time he said Pakistanis asked him to do that. I think the main reason, the main problem is that there are no military solutions to this conflict. He did that for about 37 days, bombing Iran with full force. He had the Israelis helping him, killing a lot of people, more than 3,500 civilians. And then he didn't achieve much except killing a lot of people. And then he has this problem of the Strait of Hormuz not being open the way he wants it open.
Doug, you hear Azadi in this case, speaking that they are seeing, the Iranians are seeing through all the bluster that Trump keeps putting forward. And getting to the point where you're saying that they recognize that they're stronger than they were than in the very beginning because of how it's unfolded and what's going on with the Strait of Hormuz. So they are indeed in a better position than they were when they started.
Well, there's another aspect to this that he doesn't mention that we have to take into consideration. And that is, where does Israel stand? It's not just a question of what does Mr. Netanyahu want. It's his coalition, the people that back him and support him, and the Israeli people. The Israelis, frankly, have to keep us engaged. They can't afford to allow us to disengage. That means that if Donald Trump suddenly announces, well, there's no military solution, and I've decided for whatever reasons he wants to give, that I'm going to disengage from the conflict, or I'm going to suspend hostilities, whatever. That's catastrophic for the Israelis. They're now trying to Gazify southern Lebanon with the goal of ultimately annexing it and making it part of greater Israel. They still have a broader agenda. At the same time, their position strategically is worsening because in addition to the Iranian problem, they've now got a very serious Turkish problem. In a conversation I had this morning, someone who watches this carefully told me about a Turkish announcement that essentially talks about blue areas that the Ottomans controlled, that the Turks feel are effectively their territory in any case. And that includes parts of Syria and Iraq, as well as Lebanon. I think what we're going to witness in the near future is a growing Turkish interest in exploiting what happens in Israel for its own benefit. So the Israelis have effectively strengthened a potential opponent. And I think that's why Naftali Bennett mentioned that specifically when he said, once Iran is through, or we've finished with Iran, we're going to have to deal with Turkey. The Turks are our serious enemies. Well, I think he's right, but I don't think he's going to have the benefit of defeating Iran. Instead, what they're looking at right now is, how do we keep this war going? If the United States can't win it for us, well, we have to stoke it. We have to keep the fire from dying out. Because if the United States decides to disengage, what makes anybody think that the United States will come back and open a new front against the Turks? That seems very unlikely. And if you haven't defeated Iran, what would prevent Iran from supporting the Turks against us and Israel? And we haven't even talked about Egypt. Egypt is sort of a bubbling cauldron ready to explode. And I don't know if General Sisi has really got control over there or not. There are a lot of people in Egypt that are angry that nothing has happened to Israel. They feel that they've stood by and watched helplessly as millions of Palestinian Arabs, whether you like them or not, doesn't make any difference to the Egyptians, have been murdered. And they're asking, why have we done nothing? We are the greatest or the largest Arab state in the Middle East. We have a role to play. What are we doing? So I think there are a lot of other things happening right now. And based upon everything I've said, I think the pressure on Donald Trump to resume the war, to restart it, to once again begin the process of trying to destroy what is left of Iran and the state and its society is overwhelming. So I don't see how he can back off. It doesn't make any difference what the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia or anybody else tells him. It's the understanding that if he doesn't go forward and he disengages, Israel may very well go out of existence.
Doug, you raised so many of the complexities that are involved here that they never stop. Wherever you look, there's a new complexity, a new player involved. It's ubiquitous. Let me play something for you from Trita Parsi, who was recently on, and he takes even another angle. I'd like you to just comment on what his take on what the situation is at this moment in time.
When you put all of this together, I think the picture that really emerges is there is no escalatory option for Trump that turns the tables on this and puts the U.S. in a position in which it can dictate terms. Operation Freedom, as you mentioned, lasted 24 hours. Apparently, that was enough freedom for the region. The blockade of the blockade, again, it's still in place, but Iran should have collapsed, 2.5 weeks ago, according to the calculations. Clearly not the case. The Iranians are under the impression, right or wrong, that Trump is not terribly sensitive to U.S. interests being pushed back, but he's very sensitive to his business interests and his business empire's interests being set back. And as a result, next time in the next war, don't just go after things that actually would be very bad for the U.S. Go after things that would be very bad for Trump and his family.
So, Doug, in tandem with his business interests would line up with what Israel wants him to do, protecting his pocketbook as he goes ahead with more strikes.
Oh, I think that's very true. The problem I have with Trita Parsi is that he's imputing a rational calculus to Trump. I just don't see it. If there were a rational calculus in play, let's be frank, we would never have attacked Iran. No one in their right mind would have done so for all the reasons that we're seeing right now. So emotion triumphed over reason. That's why we're in this war. And Donald Trump has said something that I think is important. He points out that, well, Americans are going to go along with me no matter what I do. Well, I don't think he can say that anymore, but I think he can certainly bet on a certain amount of complacency or disinterest inside the United States, at least until the pain becomes so acute that Americans can't stand it. We're headed that way. If you look at the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, it's being drained very, very quickly. This is, of course, in order to stave off any sort of energy crisis that might hit us. But come July, mid-July, latest 1st August, we may be in a lot of trouble with regard to that Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Remember, we've not built any new refineries in more than 20 years. These are all matters that Trump has effectively ignored and sort of dismissed out of hand because of his belief that this would end early. And I don't know if anybody told him that or he just convinced himself. But now we have to understand that Iran has actually moved new mobile launchers across the country. It's adjusted its tactics for any resumption of U.S. strikes. Iranian commanders have obviously studied our fighter jet and bomber flight patterns. They've had a lot of help from the Russians and the Chinese. The recent downing of an F-15 Eagle and the ground fire that struck an F-35 revealed that we've become pretty predictable. Now, that's not surprising. I mean, there's only so much space up there. You can't drag ships across the Middle East. They have to sit in the Red Sea, the Mediterranean, or the Indian Ocean. So I think there are a lot of things happening right now. He's trying to deal with all of it. He can't, but he does know the following. If I back out, I lose. If I say I'm not going to go forward with this unless he admits that we have a humanitarian catastrophe on our hands, which he should admit, but he won't, he can't get out. He can't disengage. And again, he's got the Israelis. And remember, their billionaire supporters in the United States put him into the White House. Look what he's doing to Thomas Massie.
Oh.
Anybody who knows anything about Thomas Massie this is a very decent, honorable man. There's nothing untoward or corrupt in any way, shape, or form about Massie. It's just a decent human being who said, look, I can't support with a clear conscience the things that you're trying to do. I think we have a severe sovereign national debt problem. The economy must come first. We have to deal with these financial realities. And what does he do? He turns around and says, this is the worst congressman in history. This is another low IQ, disreputable human being. He's corrupt. He's evil. I mean, this is crazy. This is emotion. Emotion, Gary.
Indeed.
And I think that's why he's going to turn around after he said that Iran must never have a nuclear weapon. Well, he can't stop that. I think he probably knows it at this point. So he has to give it the good old college try. And he knows, I think he may know, I assume he knows, that this next round will do immense damage to the world's energy complex. You're talking about a decade or more to recover from the damage that will be inflicted on the Persian Gulf. But in the back of his mind, he may also say, well, that hurts China. Isn't that a good thing? I mean, who knows? There are all sorts of dumb ideas rattling around inside that brain of his. That's very obvious, or he would never have done this. This made no sense. This doesn't benefit him, his presidency, anything. It doesn't, certainly, I mean, I'm sure since we're all Israel first, he's thinking about the United States and the American people down several rungs. But the bottom line is, it just doesn't make any sense. But that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with someone who defies logic.
Well, as we heard just in an earlier clip where he says he knows that people don't like it, but sometimes, somehow, it is popular anyway. Doug, you said something that tweaked my interest before regarding the refineries. We for so many years, and even Trump was saying drill, baby, drill, and we had that going on. See, it happened. We were drilling, baby. How did they miss that about building any refineries? Where's the disconnect there? How did that even happen, unfold like that?
There is no coherent strategy of any kind. In other words, if I took you to Moscow or to Beijing and sat down with you at a table, they could walk in and lay out a national strategy for energy, a national strategy for microcircuitry and artificial intelligence, a national strategy for defense. All of these things would be carefully mapped out. Now, that doesn't mean that you blindly follow the plan, but what it means is that you sit down and you assess where you are, you develop an end state. You decide, well, in 5 years, in 10 years, we want to be in this condition. That's something we don't do, Gary. We've never done it. It's never, ever happened. I mean, quick example. People sometimes in the military point to the order received by Dwight Eisenhower from FDR. Your mission is to land on the European continent and defeat the German army. Okay. Anything else? Where do you want to be when the war ends? Where do you want to meet your Soviet allies? Warsaw? Kiev? Where do you want to greet them? What are you talking about in Europe that is important to us? What are we fighting for? Well, there was none of that. On the other hand, the Soviets knew exactly what they wanted. They wanted as much of Germany as they could capture because that's the scientific industrial complex. That's the human capital foundation for science and technology in Europe. That's what they wanted. They didn't get as much as they wanted, but they got about half of it. And then they were allowed to do pretty much whatever they wanted with the various populations, push their borders forward. What did we get from what we did? It's called a huge tax burden in the form of NATO and the Cold War. That's what we got. So there was no coherent strategy. The British used to walk into these meetings with us before, in 1942 and 43, 44. And this is without the Russians present. They would walk in and they had maps of the entire world where all the oil fields were, where all the copper mines were located, the gold mines. I mean, come on. These people were imperialists. They built an empire to become rich. They knew what they wanted to control.